Welcome to Roleplaying History, the podcast where we explore the history of role-playing games. I'm Wayne Davis, and I'll be your guide for today's tour. Episode 129, Gaming Conventions, Part 2. This week we're going to pick up where we left off last week in our discussion of game conventions, and we're only covering conventions that take place outside the United States. And just like I said last week, if I don't cover your favorite, hit me up on the socials or by email. Let me know which one it is, and I'll include it when we do the inevitable follow-up episode down the line. I mean, I know we're going to do another one. Might as well admit it now. And before we get into the show, I wanted to acknowledge that yesterday, as we're doing this, was Thanksgiving in the United States. So thanks for working through the tryptophan coma to check out this week's show. Or, more to the point, thanks for bringing us along while you work your way through the Black Friday deals you're out shopping for. I mean, I'm not. I'm too damn old and brittle. Good luck to you, though. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the holiday and that you spent it with family and friends. So let's work through that turkey hangover by cranking up the tour bus and getting to this week's subject. And we'll start in Canada with Can Games. The Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo is held every year in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and it's held on the Canadian holiday weekend of Victoria Day, which takes place every May. How a show held in Ottawa has the city name of Calgary in it is something I wasn't able to figure out, but hey, we're just going to roll with it for our purposes. The very first Can Games was held in 1977, and instead of on Victoria Day, it was held on Canada Day weekend, which takes place around the same time as the United States 4th of July. And since it's held on a holiday weekend, that means it runs from Friday through Sunday, which makes its schedule about the same as most of the other conventions we've covered. Can Games, like so many other conventions we covered last week, has been held in a number of different venues over the years, with the campus of Carleton University being one that more people would recognize. At present, the con is held annually at the Rideau Curling Club, and to this very day, the convention is organized and run by a group of volunteers, just like it was on day one. Oh, and if you've never seen curling, I can't help you out on that one. Sorry. A quick overview of the convention tells us that Can Games features board games, miniature war games, and other miniature games, and tabletop role-playing games. One major difference between Can Games and the U.S. conventions we covered last week is that all of these games are available both in English and in French. Another difference is that trophies are awarded to the winners of various games. A deeper dive into the formatting of the convention notes that while the three major categories I just laid out have always been there, over the years a number of other concepts have come and gone. In the early years, seminars with guests from the gaming industry were a big deal. How big? Folks like Frank Chadwick from GDW, Jim Dunnigan from SPI, Gary Gygax when he was running TSR, and John Hill from Avalon Hill were frequent guests and speakers. Steve Newberg, who represented Simulations Canada, was there almost every year in the early years of the con, and some of those early cons also had film screenings and auctions. In the present time, new elements have been added to the convention in order to broaden the appeal to a newer, younger audience. Collectible card games have been added, as well as miniatures painting competitions. And focusing on that younger crowd, youth games have been added to the schedule as well. Now, all of that being said, Con Games has a number of games that are so popular, they're run every year. Chariots was created in the local area, and it's based on the chariot race from the ever-popular movie Ben-Hur. The Rubber Boots saga is another long-running favorite. It's in the serial style, which we all know from classic movie-going experiences. The style is that of Indiana Jones, as we follow our gumshoe detective, instead of our intrepid archaeologist, through his various cases. Another big appeal to the saga is the use of spectacularly created scale model sets. Of course, a discussion of Can Games wouldn't be complete without a discussion of its mascot, the Can Games dwarf. He appears on all of the promotional materials for the convention, and he was designed by Denis Bouveau, who many of you may know from his various fantasy artwork. For those who aren't 100% sure who he is, a lot of his work has shown up in Dragon Magazine, along with sci-fi novel covers, board games, and even some video games. The dwarf also shows up on the trophies for game winners. At present, he's sculpted from the artwork by Sandra Garrity, who some of you may also know from her fantasy fiction sculptures. If you're interested in checking out more about Can Games, or if you're interested in attending the 2024 con itself, check out their website, cangames.ca. That's CANGAMES.ca. For the next stop on today's tour, let's cross the pond and head to Birmingham, England for the UK Games Expo. The UK Games Expo is one of the newer conventions on our tours of the past couple of weeks, but in the 16 years it's been in existence, it's made quite the impact on the European convention scene. Richard Denning and Tony Hyams organized the first UK Games Expo in 2007. Attendance that first year was around 1,200, but since then it's done nothing but go up, with this year's attendance checking in at just under 53,000. Numbers like that are why the Games Expo is the largest hobby games convention held in the UK. Oh, and for those looking for comparisons to US conventions, or the rest of the world for that matter, the UKGE is the third largest tabletop games event held in the world. You want more proof? In 2008, UKGE hosted the official launch of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition in the UK, and throughout its history, UKGE has hosted some of the biggest names in the game industry from both sides of the Atlantic, and it's the convention ticket so many folks are looking to get each and every year. UKGE is so big it requires two sites to host, the National Exhibition Center and the Hilton Birmingham Metropole. And I found more than enough stuff online where attendees have mentioned that UKGE does just about everything they can do in a first-class manner. So I've hyped the convention to the nines. What about the reasons we go to conventions anyway? UKGE has pretty much every type of tabletop game you'd want to play. Board games, role-playing games, card games, war games. I mean, if you want to play it, chances are they've got it. And of course, they've got a huge vendor room, along with demos, tournaments, and all the things you'd expect from a top-notch convention. Two tournaments of note hosted at UKGE are the UK Carcassonne Championship and the UK Agricola Championship, and I'm sure I mispronounced both of those. I apologize. I'm not going to get into either one of those here because I've got them as potential topics for a future show. One other big thing that happens at UKGE are the UKGE Awards. And it should be noted that there are two categories: People's Choice, which are voted on by the attendees, and Judge's Choice, which are voted on by a panel chosen by the organizers. Both voting categories vote on 5 awards: Best Board Game, Euro; Best Board Game, Strategic; Best Card Game; Best Strategic Card Game; and Best Role-Playing Game. And thanks to the list of awards I found, I've got a ton of new games to cover on this show. Bonus for me. If you're interested in more info on the UK Games Expo, or if you're looking to attend the 2024 edition, check out their website, ukamesexpo.co.uk. For the next stop on our tour, we head for the Nordic countries of Europe for Knutepunkt. Knutepunkt is an annual role-playing game conference that's been held yearly in the Nordic countries since 1997. And for those of you who failed geography class, the Nordic countries are Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. Knutepunkt is a rather unique creation from the rest of the conventions on our list, as it was originally created to establish what's known as Nordic LARP as a concept and approach. Now, I'll expand on that momentarily, but while Nordic LARP was the primary focus of the early conventions, heck, for the first couple of cons it was the only focus, it has since expanded to bring in traditional tabletop role-playing games and concepts like the freeform game. So what do we mean by Nordic LARP? Well, the short form on this is that there are a number of different styles of live-action role-playing game out there, and while many of those are focused on LARP as an extension of a tabletop role-playing game, Nordic LARP is considered to be a bit more avant-garde, which shouldn't be a surprise since much of the avant-garde movement in film over the years has come from this part of the world. So, with Nordic LARP, the idea is to be more radical in the experimentation of the form, as well as recognizing LARP and role-playing as a whole as a form of art. That is the main concept and purpose of Knutepunkt, and players from all over the world show up every year to be a part. Last year, players from the US, Germany, France, Poland, Italy, Israel, the UK, and other nations came in to take part. So, yeah, it's a pretty big deal. The name Knutepunkt is Norwegian for meeting point or not point. Swedish and Danish use the same term, spelled a bit differently, and the Finns use the term solmukhota for the same meeting. And I'm sure I've screwed the names up throughout this, so I apologize again. The name overall means the point where two pieces of rope or string join in a knot. And obviously the name used for the convention is determined by which nation is hosting. If you're curious to see more about what the convention looks like, the Knutepunkt 2011 Vimeo channel has a number of videos on it that'll give you a pretty good idea. You can scope it out at Vimeo, that's vimeo.com/channels/KP2011. Since we're already in Europe, let's head to Lucca, Italy for the Lucca Comics and Games Festival. Originally called the Salon International des Comics, or International Congress of Comics, it was kicked off as a Franco-Italian partnership formed in 1965. In other words, Lucca Comics and Games began as a comic convention, which makes a lot of sense since at that time there were no tabletop role-playing games, and comic creators were always looking for a better way to sell more comics. In 1966, the convention was moved to a small piazza in the center of Lucca, and it continued to grow from there. In 1977, issues with funding for the convention necessitated that it only be held every 2 years, but that didn't stop the con from growing. It was also around this time that games made their way in, though board games were primarily the games being played. Role-playing games worked their way in as they became more popular in Europe and now are on almost equal footing with comics at the con. In the 1980s, the festival had to be moved again, this time to a sports center outside the city walls of Lucca, and it stayed there until 1992. At that point, it was moved to another city. But wait, how could it still be the Lucca Comics and Games Festival if it's not in Lucca? All right, stay with me here. Salon International des Comics did move out of Lucca. However, the city leaders of Lucca knew that they had something when the convention was held there. So, shortly after Salon left, they formed their own convention, initially calling it Lucca Comics. In 1996, the name was changed to its current name of Lucca Comics and Games. By 2002, it had gotten large enough to have drawn 50,000 attendees. In 2006, Salon decided they wanted to do something in Lucca for the 40th anniversary of the event, so they moved from Rome for the year, joined forces with Lucca Comics and Games, and held a huge festival in the city center, just like they'd done when they began. And how do you hold a convention in a city center? They had tents and pavilions arranged in various squares both inside and outside the walls of the city. The joining lasted for 1 year before Salon returned to Rome and left Lucca to do their thing. And Lucca's thing continued to grow. In 2016, they drew 270,000 and then broke that record in 2022 when they drew nearly 320,000. Since the convention was originally formed to be a comics convention, comics still have a large, if not primary, footprint on the convention. However, games of all kinds have made inroads into convention space over the years, with board games, war games, and tabletop role-playing games gaining a lot of space over the years. In fact, they've gained so much space, they started getting award categories of their own after comic awards had been awarded for every convention since 1970. If you want to learn more about Lucca Comics and Games, or if you're interested in attending the festival itself, check out their website, luccacomicsandgames.com. For the next convention on our tour, let's head down under. ArcanaCon is held yearly in Melbourne, Australia. It holds the distinction of being the longest-running role-playing convention in Victoria. And that's saying something because Victoria seems to have a role-playing convention running every couple of months all year long. The first convention was held in 1983 at the Melbourne University, and they didn't skimp on the games. Dungeons & Dragons, Traveller, Dragon Quest, Ruin Quest, and Call of Cthulhu were all played, and tournaments were held for all of those games. The following year, the convention moved to the University High School and also brought a mascot to the convention, Sid the Arcanosaur. In 1985, ArcanaCon moved to the Melbourne College of Advanced Education, where it remained until 1988. That year, it moved to Collingwood Education Centre, and its base stabilized until 2013. In 2014, it moved one more time to its current home at Melbourne High School. And before you poo-poo that, Melbourne High School also hosts Conquests and Unicon, so it's a popular venue for conventions in the area. The dates of the convention have moved about as much as the locations. It was originally held in September, but later moved to August, then to July. July made sense at the time because it could be run during the Victorian school holidays. In 2001, it moved to the Australia Day weekend, which tends to be around the 26th of January, and that's the time frame they're still running today. In the early days, the convention saw various themes being used for different sections of the con, but in 1994, it switched to a theme for the convention as a whole. And over the years, they've used themes like The Dirty Dozen, After the Apocalypse, and Back to the Future, just to name three. I also wanted to note that a short film about role-playing was filmed in 2007 at the convention for the Channel 31 television show Planet Nerd. And I've tried going down that YouTube rabbit hole to find it, but I ran out of time before we had to record the show. So, if you've ever seen it, either send me the link to it or give me a review of it, and I'll discuss it either on the show or on the YouTube channel. For more information on the con, their website is arcanacon.org. That's arcanacon.org. I've got one more convention that's going to make today's show, and we need to head to Ireland to cover it. WarpCon is held annually on the campus of the University College Cork. The student group WARPS, which stands for Wargaming and Role-Playing Society, touts WarpCon as Europe's largest student-run gaming convention. The first convention was held in 1991, and it was, as you'd expect, small. It took up one room of the student center, and 40 people attended. Over the years, the attendance has grown, and while I don't have current numbers, I can tell you that by 2010, they'd gotten their attendance to over 700. And while I realize those numbers are the smallest of the conventions we've covered the past 2 weeks, WarpCon has a disadvantage the others don't. Since it's student-run, they don't have a consistent organizing group that can fall back on their knowledge and experience with organizing the convention from year to year for multiple years. I mean, if half your students graduate, that means you've got to train up new organizers. And if you've ever tried to organize and run a convention, I can assure you it's a real bitch to get people trained up. WarpCon hosts, as the Warp's name for the group would tell you, a variety of war games, tabletop role-playing games, collectible card games, and a few board games. And while the majority of the games come from the European market, specifically the UK, they're always open to playing games from around the world. Over the years, and it's the primary reason I wanted WarpCon on this show, the convention has become known for its charity auction of collectibles and other items. I mean, John Kovalik offered an opportunity to be drawn as a character for a card game as an item one year. They also had Jane Cobb's hat from Firefly another year. All proceeds from the auction are donated to charity, and the success of the event led to WarpCon, along with GalCon, being recipients of the 2006 Diana Jones Award for Excellence in Gaming. And just in case you think WarpCon isn't big time, the list of special guests over the years defies that label. John Kovalik, Steve Jackson, Gareth Hanrahan, and Jervis Johnson from Games Workshop are just a few of the gaming big names that have appeared. WarpCon runs for 1 weekend in January, and that weekend tends to fluctuate due to the school schedule. So if you're interested in learning more about the convention, check out their website, warpcon.com. warpcon.com. All right, so I have to admit that I'd intended to have more international conventions on today's show. However, I ran into issues getting a bunch of my research translated in time, and I have enough trouble speaking the English language half the time, so anything else would just get brutally butchered. So, I can assure you that when I get it all translated, I'll make sure it makes a future episode. So, for now anyway, we're going to bring the tour to a close. Next week is going to be a surprise, and I say that because I've got multiple subjects ready to run, and I can't decide which one I want to run just yet. In the meanwhile, check out Bad GM's campaign build-along. This week we pick up with the group heading south to deal with Jessica Denman, and spoiler alert, they finally get their woman. Bad GM's campaign build-along is available wherever you get your podcasts or on our website, badgmproductions.net. The music we use for this show comes from pixabay.com. Check them out for all your license-free, royalty-free music needs. Roleplaying History is a production of Bad GM Productions. We are all over social media, so check out the info box for this episode or the website, badgmproductions.net, to see where you can follow us. Next week, I'll be dropping a surprise on you, and probably on myself if I'm going to be honest. Either way, it's going to be a can't-miss show. Until then, I'm Wayne Davis, and you're Role-Playing History.